I was born in New York. My father had a business there, and at the time of the recession, 1929, he moved us to Jamaica, and we went to live near his relatives in a little town called Spanish Town, which was like a large village, really. Everybody knew everybody. My granny and aunties and cousins were all there, and apart from that, every child was welcome in anybody's house. If you wanted a meal, you got meal. If you wanted to stay overnight, you could. And it was idyllic for growing up because you had so many people to choose from to be your friends or not. And really and truly, until I went to school, which was 8, then you went to school, we had the freedom of the village because everybody could say where they saw us and who we were with. And so parents never had to worry. So I went to school there when I was 8, and then I won a scholarship to a school in Kingston, Woolmer's Girls' School, when I was 11. My mother was from England. She had a sick relative, and she had to come over to look after her, and brought my sister. And I came a few months after my mother had come. I thought it was an opportunity to get to England while she was here. And she was living with a sister who was married with a daughter, and then it got very crowded. So I thought, well, I've got to make my own way now. I wanted to stay in England. I didn't want to go back home. So, because it was so narrow, it was confining, claustrophobic. And I thought, well, try my luck in England. So went to the Labour Exchange, which existed in those days, and asked what jobs I could do at 17. I really first thought of nursing, general nursing, but you couldn't do that till you were 18. But you could do psychiatric nursing if you were 17. So, and it was one of the few jobs that provided live-in and a salary. So I went for that in Bristol. I had a break of 4 months between the end of my training and the start of the next course. So I went back to New York to see if I liked it. And on the way back, on the Queen Mary, I met my husband-to-be. And we kept in touch when I went back to London, because he lived in London. And eventually, he became quite ill with overactive thyroid trouble, and I gave up my nursing training to be looking after him. And then, inevitably, the 2 children followed, and we had 12 years together before we split up. And I think they were very happy years. They weren't as free as my childhood years, but I enjoyed looking after the children. And then until Mary got very unhappy when Chris went to school at 5. She got lonely, and I realized I didn't know anybody with children her age. So she wanted friends for a birthday party, and I didn't know any. So I thought I'd have to do something about that. So some days I went a bit early to school and talked to some of the mothers and said, how do you manage, And they said, well, we just don't. We meet people here, but not socially. And because we all live over the shops or over the flats or whatever, we never see anybody except when we go shopping. So I thought, well, what can we do about that? Why don't you start your own? So I thought, well, I have no training. I don't know much about children, I couldn't take that on. So talking to several other mothers then, I said, would you be willing to help? And one of them turned out to be a qualified nursery nurse. And she said, I'll run it for you if you can do all the arrangements. So it was very difficult to get a place that would accept young children en masse. All the places we went to, the halls and so on, had made every excuse under the sun. They'll break the furniture, they'll scratch the floor. So we thought, well, the best thing to do is join, and this is really evil, the Young Wives group of the church, because if 4 of us join the group and become active in it, the vicar can't say no. So that's what we did. And we tried to persuade him that we would take the best care of the children, not allow them to cut anything up because the chairs had just been recovered. We would take care that they didn't scrape the floor. And so in the end, we won him over. And we started in a little room with all the toys that we could bring from our home, all our children's toys. We had to promise them that they'd get them back. And then the nursery nurse made a routine for us, and we helped. And we had to carry everything into the hall and everything back out, including water play and sand and tricycles and so on. And we found so much difficulty in getting the rules and regulations. We didn't know how to get free milk, for instance, because they were of an age all the children were entitled to free milk, but we had to ask for it. We didn't know where to ask. There was nothing written down, but the Save the Children Fund, Joan Pearce, gave us a lot of tips of what we could do to get all the official and the legal requirements that we needed to get. And eventually, she suggested I go to see the Minister of Health. Well, that was like, I couldn't imagine what he would be like or what he would have to do, but I phoned for an appointment and got one. And became known to him afterwards as that playgroup woman. So whenever I phoned and he heard his name, that playgroup woman's on the phone again. So, but we became good friends in spite of it. And he said that it wasn't good to be aggressive and also to play up their naivety, because you would get more offers of help then. And he really trained me into being diplomatic about approaching ministers or politicians and things like that. And after several visits with him, I thought, there must be many people who would want to do this but don't know how, and can't get started, and don't live in London, so they can't get easy access to ministers. And so let's write a letter to the Guardian, 150 letters the next week. And that pace kept up for quite some months. I was responsible for all the correspondence. And it was quite thrilling to see the different postmarks, places I'd never even heard of. But the sad thing was that where you would imagine childhood would be perfect, often proved not to be, because the farms, for instance, have such dangerous equipment that the children had to be kept in the house most of the time until they were old enough to know the dangers. The seaside places were overrun in the summer with visitors, and so their freedom was blocked in a way, and other things like that. And they all said, please help us. Please help us. We would love to do our own thing and get a group of children together. The house is big enough and you had to get the building approved. So we started sending out these sort of, that we'd already written, the instructions of how to go about building, equipment, whatever, and all the legal requirements too. And then, of course, they replied back and said, we've done it, and what do we do next? So it became obvious to us, the 8 people or 10 people that were working together, that we would have to keep up in being in touch with these people, encouraging them and telling them because some of them had some good ideas as well to share. And so I thought, well, I'll learn to type, use my husband, which I did with 2 fingers, use my husband's Gestetner to roll stencils off, and we will have a monthly newsletter where we can incorporate other people's ideas, our own, what's happening, what the central group are doing in London. And by then we started to get requests to come out and speak to local groups or local councillors. And the biggest obstruction was the men. They could see all kinds of dangers in encouraging this sort of thing. And they said that they hadn't had it when they were children, and look at them, you know. And they were quite happy, and mother baked bread and made jam and all that, quite happy. And what did they need to play for? The men's attitude was different. No father, for instance, would be seen with a pushchair, much less a baby in a sling, going round the supermarket. And it was really those men with hard ideas about children, almost like they didn't like them, you know, that couldn't see the sense of it all. And then we got 1 or 2 on our side and asked them to join the trustees or the advisors or whatever. I was circling all around England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, and even got an invitation to the Isle of Wight, but I didn't ever go there. I sent somebody else instead. Not for any particular reason, but I was just so booked up. And of course I still had 2 children at home. Mary wasn't at school. I had to take her with me, and luckily she was the right personality to do that. My son was safely in school, so if I could work within the school day, I could do the travelling. But sometimes it needed overnight stay, and of course my husband worked at home, so it was okay. But I covered more miles. Thank God for British Rail, because it was really efficient then, and you got there when you said you would, you know. And then it was very strange, because usually the women of the playgroups were organising the hall and the seating and the refreshments, sent the husbands to meet me. And so we would sort of look and think, he looks like a playgroup husband. And they would think, she looked like an organiser, you know. And then in the end, one of us would get the courage to say, are you looking? I didn't think of holding up signs, you know. And he'd say yes, and he'd very embarrassed about all this, because it wasn't the usual sort of thing. And in Ireland, even worse, when they sent a priest to meet me, because some of the priests were so shy that we didn't actually make contact with each other for quite a while. And then I would say, are you Father Wren or Father whatever? And he'd say, yes, I'm come to fetch you to the organisation. I remember in Ireland once, I did quite a lot of work in Ireland. In fact, I helped to set up the first nursery nurses training with a nun who was a lecturer at a college, and being asked, why do they need to be trained to work with children? And what a waste of training if they get married. A priest asked me that. And I said to him, well, it's not wasted, because if they do get married, they'll be better Irish mothers. And he became my friend after that, because he always asked Sister Monica how I was and what was I doing. But it was a lot of feeling that a woman couldn't run an organisation. There'd have to be a man. And when we got a few men on the committee, they were quite satisfied, because they thought that'd be taken care of then, especially if it was finances, because they didn't think we would be any good. And sometimes I think they talked down the members of Parliament that I spoke to. Some of them talked down to me, like, you're only a little woman, you know, why do you worry your pretty little head about that? Leave it to the men. And sometimes I used to think, if we left it to the men, you know, nothing would be done, because they certainly wouldn't be looking out for children's interests. being children, it's not rated highly still, not rated highly at all. And yet they can't see. They've got such blinkers on that they can't see that investing in children is a good investment. And to give children the benefit of socializing and learning in a happy way, not with checklists and all of that, because I'm dead against that sort of thing, because it's not all one size fits all. With children, I mean, I know from my two, chalk and cheese, you know, and things that would excite Christopher left Mary flat, and things that Mary would get excited about, he wasn't bothered with. And if you just think about it, what group of personalities all fit together and can be ticked on a tick list? I do think that you should keep records of children's progress and interests and develop the interests into progress. That's what we used to do at school anyway, until the government decided that wasn't the right way to teach. Joking, franchises. I would be a millionaire by now. But that's not the way I wanted to go. Some organizations have, some business groups have, and do the business playgroup things as franchises. But I didn't want to go that way, but I wish I had sometimes. I I didn't set out to do that, but it's good to know that it's been recognized and that I have achieved something.